there's a link in the email that you got with all the links here to these webinar Zoom meetings. We wanted this session here, the last live one for the day, to be as relevant as possible to what's been going on recently with the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, and wanted to have an opportunity to discuss openly people's feelings and thoughts, and how these issues of racial injustice, police brutality, affect our fellow citizens, our neighbors, and our KRM clients and ourselves. I am going to try very quickly to get out of the way and let our kind of main speaker, Kumba Mbayo, speak and help lead this conversation. We had talked about having a lot of opportunities for people to ask questions and to discuss in the chat. If need be, I have some questions that I can help the discussion along, but I'd rather it be coming from you all, and to hear Kumba speak. So Kumba, I'll let you introduce yourself. Just generally, I'll just say that Kumba is also a advisory board member for KRM, and just a friend of the organization, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you so much. My name is Yamukumba Mbayo. I'm the son of Kaite Mbayo, the daughter of Bibi Sombe Mwangi, and we are from a village called Zimba in Congo, and that's who I am. I'm very honored to be here to speak, to share who I am, and to learn myself from my own experiences. And together, hopefully, we can have an important discussion. But to begin with, I would like to start with a moment of silence for a few seconds as a way to remember those that we've just lost recently, and the reason why we are actually having this conversation is because of those incidents. So if we may, please be with me. Thank you very much. Yes, to begin, we have a video, a little short clip of a video to talk about, to watch sort of an introduction to the conversation today. And thank you for being here, foremost, and thanks to everybody that organized this, and the people that we are seeing and the people that we are not seeing. Again, thanks for the opportunity, really. And the discussion today is going to be around Black experience, African experience, African American experience. So we'll start with a short video that we have prepared. I think it's ready. Yeah.
John Henry Clark, who was a noted historian, 90-some years old if he was still alive, said this about history. He said that history is like a clock. It tells of people the historical time of day. It tells where they've been, where they are, and where they yet still have to go.
African Cemetery number 2, earliest recorded cemetery in Lexington to be organized, owned, and managed by African Americans. The site has been in existence since 1869. Trustees of Benevolent Society number 2 successfully operated cemetery. Many individuals buried here were important leaders in the community.
The people buried in that cemetery are largely the people who put a foundation for African American communities in Lexington following the Civil War.
And the story of these former enslaved men and women after emancipation is just graphically told in studying their lives. They became the leaders, the entrepreneurs, the business people, the civic organizers. They formed fraternal organizations. They were part of the Masons, the Colored Fair, the Colored Orphan Home. All of these people are buried in this cemetery. Early church leaders who founded and organized some of the early churches in Lexington.
I hold very strongly to a belief that when we do not know our history, when we do not have opportunities to learn about the biographies of people who have gone before us, then we lose opportunities to understand fully who we came from and who we can become. There are stories here that have been long dormant.
It's an almost forgotten chapter of Lexington's history.
This is a spot where so much national history is potentially located, and yet it's not really well known about. To me is a shame, and it's something that needs to be better brought out.
I have tried to unbury information about African Americans and bring it to light so that hopefully the full Kentucky narrative will be more inclusive of the contributions that African Americans have made.
That the cemetery has gone through so much neglect, renewal, desecration, vandalism, and it's still there. It's just been amazing that it has survived. I mean, just truly, because so many cemeteries just get wiped away, and this could have been one of them.
Part of the restoration is a continuation of the work that has been laid here by our foreparents. They're taking the task to buy the land and create the cemetery. It was part of a larger effort to create community, create a legacy, create a safe place for their children and their grandchildren.
And to know that this cemetery holds their remains, it also holds their stories. You cannot help but uncover their stories when you start looking for their names.
This story out here on 7th Street, with all this industry around us and all these railroad tracks, is an important story as any other story. This is your story too. Whether you're African American, European American, Latino, African refugees, whoever you are, wherever you're from, that this story is important to you as well. This story can inspire you.
Yes, thank you so much. So we'll begin with that, the Lexington history of African American. Before we even start that, we'll mention again that what has been mentioned in the previous sessions, that we are standing on indigenous ground, indigenous soil. That's the first thing that I would like to point out as we go on with this conversation. That's going to be around history, really, and trying to tie together what is going on today and sort of in a historical timeline. And in that, also my experience as a Congolese refugee here in Lexington who is Black in America, a Black man in Lexington. And Derek will also help me, as sometimes maybe if I go off track, we'll get a few questions to sort of like get an idea, hit some points that we've already prepared in our conversation before this session. So I have some notes here, but to begin, so we are talking basically the movement going on right now of Black Lives Matter, I would say, has brought up some things, and we've seen some things happen that have, really made us question what is going on and ask for answers, for more answers. I think the death of George Floyd and also countless others like Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor here in Kentucky, in Louisville. So we're starting to with also the time that we have right now, the fact that we are in a global pandemic and we are using technology and we are connected in that way. We have cameras on our phones. We communicate quickly. And with that time that we have sitting at home, we are reflecting and we are, we have questions on things that we see and we hear. So we are hearing a movement, Black Lives Matter, that the fact that the justice system really, that's where I can say the question is coming down to, the justice system and the trust there. And now for me, as a Congolese who's coming from Africa, Central Africa to Lexington, and having to go, having to fit into that narrative, right? Trying to find myself into that, what is going on there, and trying to find my responsibility. And hopefully also this conversation is about responsibility. Like, what is my responsibility in all of this? And also, what is your responsibility in this conversation, in everything that's going on, really? That's a responsibility that we have to reflect and to see and to act upon that. So my responsibility as a Congolese person that's coming here, I think it's throughout, like I was learning. I didn't know as much about what the environment that I was in really meant. For example, we spoke about this, Derek, coming to the US, and you are, I'm African. I think to myself, I know I'm Emba, which is what my tribe is, and I'm coming here as a refugee. And if you ask me who I am, I'll tell you I'm Congolese. I'm Emba. I'll tell you my family, where my village is from, where my village is, and where my people are from, and such. So with that, you are doing an application, and you get to that section that says your race, ethnicity, Caucasian, African American, Latino, blah, blah, blah. And most of the time, the first time I encountered that, and I've seen other people go through this experience, you sort of confused as to where you fit in that. You're not white, you're Caucasian, you're not Latino, you're not African American, you're Emba. And sometimes you ask, so, it's a real moment that most people have. And then maybe somebody tells them, you are African, you should check the African American box, because here in America, African American means this and this, which you are in that category. So that's the system that we live in. And as a refugee, it's a process of learning what is going on and where do you fit in all of that. And that's just an example that I'm giving, but I'm sure if you look, you can see it in different ways. You can see it shown in other ways. So finding myself, here, and I'm a Black man, and what does that mean in all of that? With the history of the United States, what does it mean to be Black, to be African American? So then you have to learn that, and then it's education. Now you have to educate yourself. And if the education system doesn't provide that for you, maybe you don't get that. Your process is slower, maybe your process is quicker than the other to understand exactly what in that. This is a different experience for parents, right? It's a different experience for children. It's a different experience for women. It's a different experience for men. And that in itself, like a man in manhood in itself changes, when you so it's a cultural, what we know about, resettlement, which is, you're adapting to a new culture. But also in that, I think for Africans, there is the aspect of trying to find yourself in the racial dynamic of the United States, you can say. So in the United States, there's issues, there's the issues of killing, but and that the justice system is broken, and the rights right now are asking that improvements be made. We are hopeful, at least, that the voices are being spoken, and voices hopefully will be heard. But it's going to take definitely, honest people to understand and to stand up and to decide to bring changes to those demands. So the education system, I think that's a big point to us refugees who are coming here, learning how to adapt and cope in the environment. I'm also going to talk about what we studied about African American history in Lexington, per se. That around just in Camp Nelson, talking about refugees, refugee experience. Camp Nelson was a very large refugee camp. Camp Nelson was a very large refugee camp for African American who were during the Civil War were running away in search for freedom, and the Union camps were a place for refuge. All right, so that's a history of refugees here in Kentucky. So talking about that history, we have we have African Americans that fought in that war, and that I knew about and learned about in songs. The Buffalo Soldiers. All right, the Buffalo Soldiers were here. Where some of them were from Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, and they rolled out all over the United States. And so that's part of our history here in Lexington. That's part of African Americans. And this history that's important for people to know, like the video said, to understand really the past so that you can plan for the future in that. I don't know if there are any questions in this section. Yes, please. I'm not the moderator. I think I was given access, but if I may please get some help.
I think we're going to post our questions in the chat.
Okay. Is it possible to allow? All right. I think we will take questions in the chat.
Okay.
But
Derek, did you have any questions that you wanted to go ahead and fill in with first? Did you hear me, Derek? Uh-oh. Okay, Mary, you're unmuted.
I think Derek has lost audio. Now my Derek's gonna make noise right this second.
Yes, Luna,
Derek's
thank
gonna
you.
log back on. I think the chat is actually disabled.
Ah, what? Okay.
Those questions
Strange.
aren't coming in, but I think if that can be. Sorry, she's been so quiet all day. I apologize.
All right.
While we're getting that back up and running, I thank you for being here, Kumba, for getting us started. And I think we all look forward to hearing more of your perspective. So thank you for that. I do want to mention the book. There's a book that is about the Camp Nelson as a refugee camp. It's called Embattled Freedom. And actually the woman who wrote it is a KRM volunteer, instructor. I am so sorry. Out on the break. I'll put a link when the chat comes back up to that book, but it's called Embattled Freedom, Journeys Through the Civil War's Slave Refugee Camps. It's written by Amy Murrell Taylor, who won a big award for the book. It was published November 2018. So I will link to that. Thank you for bringing that up. But
All right, somebody give the chat a try. There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that. And thank you, Luna. I think those were Luna's questions. If you could just interpret that for us and put that in the chat, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Question?
it's I think, all right. Should I? Yeah, I'll just continue on and then we can catch up on the question there. So this part, I want to speak a little bit about the people before me, what was going on before me. And before I do that, let's talk about the justice system a little bit, about the United States, and sort of get an idea of what people are talking about. So after the Civil War, the 13th Amendment, right, in the United States. So I'm going to read a little bit about I'm going to read what the 13th Amendment says and move forward with some comments. So it reads, neither slavery nor voluntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So this 13th Amendment is what freed slaves, enslaved people, not slaves, correction, enslaved people. So in that, it said that slavery is not allowed except for when there's a crime or involuntary servitude. So that is what we go about. And there is a prisoner that's challenging this, a prisoner that I read about. He wrote letters. If you get a chance, please go read some of his letters. He was on death row while he was writing this. It was about 4 weeks before his death. His name is Ray Jasper. He says that challenging the justice system, that if you can turn, like basically slavery did not end, it was turned into a crime. And when the justice system, gets abused, then really people that are going into prisons are going in there with being punished into slavery, to say. So if we look again into into the prison system, we see that it disproportionately affects a lot of the African American community, the prison system. I'm gonna read part of his letter, what he wrote in the letter. Ray Jasper. And he said, when I walked into prison at 19 years old, I said to myself, damn, I've never seen so many black dudes in my life. I mean, it looked like I went to Africa. I couldn't believe it. And then he followed up with the lyrics of Tupac Shakur, which goes, the penitentiary is packed and is filled with blacks. So this is what people are saying, not me. People that are in prison, people that have been to prison, Tupac, a black man in America. So this gives us a perspective on sort of what is going on around the justice system in our country, and what is the experience of black people here in the country. So and then I want to talk about before because I was born in Congo. Before I was born, what was going on in Congo? I've always been curious of those kind of conversation. So I'm going to talk about a king in the Kingdom of Congo, whose name was Alfonso. That was his Portuguese name, his baptism name. He wrote to the King of Portugal. They had a relationship at that moment, and wrote to them explaining what was going on in the kingdom. All right. His other name was Mvemba Nzinga. He was born in 1460 and died in 1542. So he wrote a letter to the King of Portugal, and I'm going to read the letter also. This is also another perspective on sort of the beginning of the result of what we have.
Hey, Kuma.
Yes.
At the end of that letter, if you would like, I think we should unmute people and open up for questions, if that's okay with you.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So it goes, Sir, Your Highness could know how our kingdom is being lost in so many ways that it is convenient to provide for the necessary remedy, since this is caused by the extensive freedom given by your agents and officials to the men and merchants who are allowed to come to this kingdom to set up shops with goods and many things which have been prohibited by us, and which they spread throughout our kingdoms and domains in such abundance that many of our vessels whom we had in abundance do not comply because they have the things in greater abundance than we ourselves. And it was with these things that we had to them, content and subjected under our salvage and jurisdiction. So it is doing a great harm, not only to be to the service of God, but the security and peace of our kingdom and state as well. And we cannot reckon how great the damage is, since the mentioned merchants are taking every day our natives, sons of the land, and the sons of our noblemen, and the vessels and our relatives, because thieves and men of bad conscience grab them, wishing to have the things and wares of this kingdom which they are ambitious of. They grab them and get them to be sold. And so great, sir, is the corruption and licentiousness that our country is being completely depopulated. And your highness should not agree with this nor accept it as in our service. And to avoid it, we need to, from those kingdoms, no more than some priests and a few people to reach in schools, and no other goods except wine and flour and blah, blah, blah. But the main point is the complaint that the king is making to the world, to other kings about his people. Thanks.
Okay, so everyone is currently unmuted, but if you will go ahead and mute yourself if you're not asking a question, we'd appreciate that. And if you have a question you'd like to ask, I think it would be easiest if you could use the reaction button to raise your hand. There's a little smiley face, and when you click on it there, it'll give you a hand or a thumbs up. So if we could do that, I think we could keep this a little more organized, and I'll scroll through and try to recognize people. Okay, Derek.
Kumba, thank you, and thanks for everyone's patience, and I've appreciated some of the comments in the comment section. I wanted you and I had talked previously before this about you know, your own experience here in the United States. I asked you kind of a somewhat strange question. I said, did you ever experience racism before you got to the United States? And you know, what I thought was interesting, you said, you know, yes, you know, Africa obviously has racism. You know, it's based in colonialism, and so that is happening, has happened in the United States and continues to happen here as well. I just wanted to know if you would be willing to share some of your own experience specifically here in the United States of how you have experienced racism generally.
I've experienced it in the shop, you know, going in the shop and being looked at as if I was stealing. Actually, we got stopped and ID'd, detained pretty much for a good 2 hours in the mall. And it's Black people's reality. You know, that's what Black people go through here. That's what we tell our brothers, younger brothers, you know, that, hey, watch out for this, you know, when you drive, and if you get pulled over, do this, this, and this, and that. So it's the truth about living here at the moment as, you know, as a Black man. And I've played soccer, in sports. I've gone to play outside of Lexington, where we've been called names, monkeys, all sorts of names that I can start showing here. But that shows what my experience is here. And to say to that, what Derek was talking about, that coming from from Congo. So we are talking about this idea of white supremacy. That's what really this conversation is about. Okay, and how it's shaped the world and history. This idea that white people don't agree with, and Black people don't agree with, and some white people agree with it. But the idea of supremacy is, we've seen it throughout history, examples of it, and we don't agree with it, honestly. Like the whole world usually doesn't agree with certain things that sometimes we see perpetuated in our society. So to that, like white supremacy, how
check online.
Just power, right? Power in itself, and the people with less power. But so talking about where I come from, we also have a history of colonialism, right? Here, there were, and throughout the world, in the previous conversation about indigenous communities in, is it Honduras, I think we're talking about earlier?
Guatemala.
Guatemala, I'm sorry. Guatemala. We mentioned that, they mentioned that, there was, the indigenous folks were enslaved also. So we see that throughout, also in Congo with colonialism. Basically, it was a system of similar to enslavement, where people worked on rubber plantations and paid quotas, and they had their hands cut off if they didn't make the quotas. And it was horrible for a long time, colonialism in itself. And all of that, I was also, like food, right? They wanted spices, control sugar, right? We wanted more sugar into the tea that we're drinking. So we had sugar plantations in Brazil, Haiti. We wanted spices in, China. So we, like in India. So all these things that we are doing because of, we want to access to a certain lifestyle. I think that's the truth. That's some truth to it. So we colonized. So Congo, Africa was colonized, and the result of that is a lot of people lost their lives. It's really difficult to recover. So we do see some element of like white supremacist ideas in Africa. People still do this. People that believe that a white person is superior. That was taught in education, in science, for a very long time. For a very long time, Darwin, said Black people were inferior, and in the Bronx Zoo, they would have Black people, pygmies from Congo, being shown out in public for as entertainment. That was allowed until people fought, honest people that said it wasn't right. So these ideas that it's all about, at the end of the day, about what ideology is fair, I think, at the end of the day. But we do have to really think about the way we are thinking and the ideas that we are producing. Because it's about, us today, it's also about the world that we want to live after us, the world that we want to build. Because other people, put a lot of effort, obviously, to make the changes. And the truth is that the changes can be made in the legal in the justice system. It's just a matter of acting on some things. Really, I don't know if anybody a question. And how much longer do we have? I wasn't quite keeping the time, Lindsay.
We have what, about 15 more minutes.
Okay, so with also that, I want to talk about let's talk about what can we do, like what kind of things can we do to act on in our daily life, like after knowing all of this, and what do we do, for example, for to the African American community here in Lexington. All right, and I'm not the one with all the answers, and I'm not the one to really, I don't know, like that knows all about what is going on in terms of Black Lives Matter and the conversation that's going on here today. But I can speak at least about what I know here in Lexington. And for example, here in Lexington, we have our schools, and the way we invest in our schools really should be talked about in a way that we try to intentionally support some communities. For example, some schools. For example, there's some schools that we know that are struggling in Lexington, like Winburn Middle School. I don't know if you've ever been to Winburn Middle School, but if you go to Winburn Middle School, students there need more support. And I don't know what the answers are specifically, but I think we ought to be having real conversations about things like this. There's schools in certain neighborhoods here that need to support their students, that need to do more work, and we need to sort of talk about it and invest money, I think, in that. We have refugees that come here that live in those neighborhoods. We have refugees that go to those schools. So it's a conversation about the experience of a refugee, the experience of a Black person in America. And we had another conversation about education in the previous session, talking about educational opportunities. And opportunities can be many different things. Opportunities to learn among each other, opportunities to promote culture. One thing that I can say is also that the things that we are learning in school, that we need to add more things around, history and culture, learning like local history and things like that.
Kumba, if I could butt in for a second, I would say back toward the beginning, Brittany had a really good question in the chat box of how do we come together? And I think what we need to do most, like you said, is educate ourselves. And when I say we, I mean white people. We have to commit to putting in that work. And I think that's where we have to start.
Indeed. And, it's hard to know what to be white is for me. So I can maybe only speak on what I see as, on the other side. It's true what Lindsay said. It's that, taking action on things. And Lindsay, would you like to add on to like what the question specifically, you said, how do we unify? How do we come together?
Yes, let me go back to it. It was quite a ways back in the chat box. And Brittany, if you, there we go. So Brittany, would you like to repeat your question, or do you want me to read it? Okay. How can we as Americans in the world learn to have solidarity and reconciliation and have more dialogue for change to happen?
Reconciliation, I think what you said was right, Lindsay. That's what I would say too. Education. And it's a process. I think everybody can look at themselves in the past and say, you've changed so much. There was growth. And I think it's providing opportunities to learn. Opportunities and really like learning. One way, an example that I can give of my life. I learned so much playing with other people, playing soccer. I played soccer so much. I love soccer. I still play it. And I learned so much from other people. And other people learn so much from me, from interaction. And I think genuine interaction. And it's gonna take that, really. And instead of isolation, we can at least step out of our door and say hi to your neighbor, check on them, see how they're doing, especially with all of this that's going on. This is the time. And somebody else said this to me, and I was like, oh, wow, yeah, that's very true. This is the time to reach out and say, how are you doing? How are things going? You know.
But maybe from a safe distance.
Yeah. Can we have Marilyn comment? I see
Yes,
Marilyn
please.
raising her hand.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah. First of all, I think part of the issue that we have is that when we are screaming for help, white people are not listening. Just like the protest, if one person acts up, that's all they talk about is the violence of that or the disruption, rather than the root cause. Like when Kaepernick took a knee, there were complaints about his taking a knee on the national anthem instead of why he took the knee. We've got to start concentrating on the why and listening. And in my church, we have a group called Unitarian Universalist Partners for Racial Justice. I'm the only Black, the full Black. We have some mixed people in there. Yeah. But the point is, even with them wanting to learn what to do, I had to ask them, quit telling us what to do and listen to what we're saying. And that's the hardest part, getting people to listen. And once they listen and actually hear us, you will know or come to some ideas of what you can do to solve some of the problems. And something funny that you said, Yamukumba, that I thought was really funny, in the 60s and 70s when I was protesting and stuff, we had one particular person, Angela Davis, that did something that was so funny. She knew how we were treated as African Americans. Back then we were Black, okay? And she went into a shoe store that she knew they would not wait on her as an American-born Black. She pretended she was speaking some African language, and they rushed to her to serve her. So to make a long story short, there was a time when actually foreign-born African Americans were treated better than Americans who were born here, than African Americans that were born here. But now things have changed, and you're treated just like us. You know, you have to deal with all the racism that we do. One thing I would like to ask you that I asked in the chat room a long time ago is, as a foreign-born African American, do you fear the police like most of us American-born Blacks?
Do you think the police does what? Do I think?
Do you fear them when they approach you, stop you in your car, or ask you questions which seem to be out of place? Do you fear them like we do?
Oh, there was a police officer that came to my house. Like we were hanging out outside. We had a fire. It was at 2 a.m. and we were just talking loudly, like African people talk. And obviously, we made a lot of noise. And the police officer came. We didn't hear them, but they came, parked, and there were two officers. One walked all the way behind us. Literally, he was maybe 3 steps away from us. And he flashed his light. What are you guys doing? But you can't behave like that as an officer. That's irresponsible.
Yeah.
Oh, those fancy ones. We're gonna try those on.
He did that. I don't know if it was because of our race, but it was irresponsible of an officer to behave like that, because it can cause a lot of issues. Like if somebody suddenly moved, maybe there was something that was suddenly looked like a gun, or like he should have said something that he was there, not the way he behaved. So that was a very scary moment. I was like, crap. And then we went through that, and obviously nothing happened. They just told us to be quiet. But I thought of so many scenarios that I've seen on videos that could have happened to me.
Eric from our staff Eric, because you're commenting on this same question. I don't know. Sorry, I think people were unmuted, and then if you muted yourself, Lindsay couldn't unmute you again. But Eric Ngamide, who also works with us, said he just started feeling the same way. I think fear of the police is what he's referring to. He said it was a matter of had to deal with before. So chipping in on that.
And I would like to say also the other difference that another African person in our community said on Facebook, that us Africans, we historically, like, we still can speak Swahili and have these names like Yamukumba Mbayo, which I can go back home and say and find like where my mom is from and say I'm from here, like, or buy land back home and say, I'm like, I have that opportunity to become a global citizen in some way. I have like relationships across the world, to where an African American may not have that to them, to who they are. So that is historically with slavery that's a reality. So for my kid, I may name my kid a name. My kid is going to be obviously an African American, and if they're raised here, and most of our refugee children will be American, and then their names may, they may be able to find their roots, and then the next generation, if maybe they may not have that opportunity, depending on how history plays out. But that's the sort of the difference between the first generation of immigrants, maybe the first few generations of immigrants, once you immigrate to a country. So I'm speaking in my experience as a Black person, an African person coming here. To say to that, so I'll also encourage African American to look for opportunities, or for us to create opportunities for African American to be global, to be able to have access to go outside, to go experience the world outside of this place. That opportunity, I think, is limited in our communities, and it's a very important, empowering experience to know that the world is like this, and there's other people like me here, and there's other people like me here. Oh, they're doing this and this. Yes, there's problems everywhere. There's problems, solutions, but there are moments experiences that can really educate somebody, can make somebody grow.
Lindsay, I think Shay was trying to unmute. I don't know if Shay, you have a comment. I don't know how to, I don't have control of the muting, but I see that you're talking and I can't hear you, Shay. Oh,
There we go.
Okay, looks like it let me know. Thanks. Yeah, I didn't really have anything to say. I wanted to second one of the questions that was up here. I don't know if we have time to answer it, but it was kind of personal, but just asking what your experience has been with your identity as a Black man in Africa versus a Black man in America. Sounds, I mean, it seems like it would be very, very different.
Different. There's that saying that I am what I am because of other, like what other people see me as, you know. I'm what I am because of other people. Other people's perspective and view on you do affect who you are, has a relationship onto who you are. So as a Black man coming to as soon as I come to the US, I can see change, I can feel the change in how I'm perceived, you know, compared to like when I'm in Africa, when I'm just maybe a Black man with dreadlocks. All right, compared to like, I'm just a guy with dreadlocks, not a Black man with dreadlocks. Compared to here, where I'm maybe a Black guy with dreadlocks. Where maybe I'm just a young man with dreadlocks. So that's the difference. I think the way people see you and your identity changes depending on what environment you're in. That's what I can say from my.
We do have a couple more questions. I see Melissa Levine and Connie McNeely have their hands up. Melissa, would you like to ask something?
Sure. There may not be time by now to get into this, but I had an experience with a refugee family that I'm working with, where the dad has been in jail for 13 months, and he has 3 boys at home, and the boys aren't sure how to relate to the police. This is an Asian family, not an African family. But a year ago, one of the boys was in my car and we passed a police car, and he said, if the police stop you, do they take you to jail? And I said, no, they probably were stopping me to give me a ticket because I was speeding or something. And he said, well, they stopped my dad and took him to jail. And then more recently, his brother commented to me about George Floyd. And he said the police put their knee on this man's neck for, he said, 6 minutes. And his eyes were like saucers. And, you know, all I could think to say was, and that was really very wrong. And he got fired and he's been charged with murder. But I know that what these boys are thinking about is that they are very much in danger in the United States. They would be more in danger if they went home. But life is not exactly safe here either. And I wonder how you would respond.
Yeah, I don't know if I have the answer, but the relationship, I think we need to, like, we see police in the movies, we see police in so many, as kids. I'm trying to put myself into that position, and they have so much power, they do so much in movies, and then the encounter that you have with them, you're going to judge that a lot. That's gonna be your point of reference a lot. So I can say that there's other opportunities that I've had maybe to see where police were interacting with kids in a different way. But yeah, I may not, know how to react myself in that situation.
I know we're running out of time, but I just want to take a second. If you follow us on Facebook or you saw our Facebook about the summit today, we put up a definition of refugee, and I'm just going to read it. Part of it that we put in bold is just really striking. So a refugee is a person who is unable or unwilling to return to his or her country because of a well-founded fear of persecution due to race, membership in a particular political or social group, opinion, religion, or national origin. And it's really striking and sobering to me that we're now in a time when Black Americans could credibly pass that credible fear interview for refugee or asylum. That is, if they were trying to move to Canada or somewhere because of what the systemic racism and fear that is there. So I know that's a weird way to, I don't know. To me, it's just very sobering and timely that we're talking about World Refugee Day and we're having this day to talk about these issues, but it's so here present at home for so many Americans as well. So I just wanted to point that out to people.
May I ask a question, or is it too late?
I'd like to make a comment first. This is Connie.
Go ahead, Connie.
Okay. This is addressed to all the white people listening. And I want to say that it's our responsibility to educate ourselves, and that Black friends of ours can help with that. They can tell us their experiences, but it's our responsibility to do what we need to read, to interact with other people, have conversations, to learn ourselves and take responsibility for our own behavior. And I've started having some conversations with some of the people in my life that I never thought I would be talking about these ideas with, about white privilege and anti-racism. And they've been incredible conversations that I never thought I had. I've learned more about the individuals. We've had more real conversations than I've ever had. I go to the Quaker meeting, and we've got several groups now that provide an opportunity to either learn about these issues or just to have conversation about what we're experiencing or what we need to do in our own communities. So anyhow, I just wanted to sneak that in. I'm sorry whoever was going to comment. And I do appreciate, Mary, your noting that at this time, there are many things in this country that are things we used to decry of other countries, like rigged elections and other things that are on the horizon for us that we would have designated as things that were going on in other countries. So we're at a difficult time.
And who was the other person? I couldn't see who was talking that wanted to ask a question.
My name is Joe Johnson.
Go right ahead, Joe.
Yes, ma'am. And this is for Kumba. Kumba, you've been called many different names and during this. What would you prefer? How do you identify yourself?
Yamukumba is like the professional me. Kumba is when like I'm, not doing something properly. Kumba. Frank is like when I'm very nice to you. You can call me Frank. So I guess I can say that any of the name. Kumba is short for Yamukumba, so it's much easier because Yamukumba is my first name.
What about ethnically? Like African American, or how do you identify yourself ethnically, I guess?
Yeah. I can say that I'm more of like a human, trying to say that I'm a human being, and then I was born in Congo, so my tribe is Emba. I have Emba heritage, right? And then my nationality is American, but I was born in Congo, so, and grew up in Congo. And then Lexington is my home. When I leave Lexington, I really miss Lexington. So like, I don't even know what I can say to that. And that's the thing about it, is that also there are refugees that were born in refugee camps, that parents are Congolese, they were born in a refugee camp in Tanzania, and then they think they are Tanzanian. Sometimes they think they're Congolese. So it's so interesting with us that have, been through migration and such. It's very complicated. It's complicated,
All right. Well, if we have no further questions, thank you all so much for attending today. I really appreciate you bearing with us as we go virtual for the first time. I think it went off fairly well. I guess Derek didn't say it, neither did Mary, but I will. If you guys feel so inclined, you can always make a donation to KRM to help them continue doing the great work they do here in Lexington. So thank you all. And again, these were all recorded. And if you want to go back to it, it'll be up on our website. And have a great weekend. Bye.